If you just take the sum of the non-employment rate plus manufacturing share, how many of men are in this, less than a 4-year college degree, 21 to 55, how many work in manufacturing, in the share of them work in construction, and plot that from 2000 to 2015 over this period, okay? So this will be manufacturing, construction, and not working at all. That roughly describes about half, just a little under half, about 48% of all men in this group, and it's been relatively stable from 2000 to 2015.
So one theory,
yeah,
maybe it's not the right story, it would be a theory that says, basically, what we did is we took the guys who would have been in manufacturing and construction and moved them to non-employment, out of the labor market, so they're not working.
Yeah.
But construction hasn't really changed very much over that long period, has it?
It did. Beginning the end, it's right back. It's about 11% of this group of men working that in 2000. About 11% are working in 2015. So this is all manufacturing.
Your insight of looking at the world, saying you can't ignore construction and men, they're both important parts of the story, are really important for understanding kind of how we got from where we started to where we the path we took.
Yep. Exactly.
And why it shows up as something that looks so cyclical, even though in your story it's really very secular or trend driven. At the end of the day, construction probably takes very much a back seat to manufacturing as driving this.
Yep, from the 00 to 2015, yes.
Okay.
And so how do you test this? So, these are all just some descriptive data. You could look at it. It kind of makes sense when you kind of talk about it, but you got to go further. So I could tell you what we do to kind of shed some light that this story isn't that crazy. The data wants to speak to it. That's what we talked about early on. You got a theory, you have some hypotheses, you show some kind of data that kind of says, it doesn't sound crazy, but you gotta test things a little bit, more formally.
So your data, your hypothesis in a large sense was driven by the data.
Exactly.
I take it. You didn't sort of become a theorist sitting in your office and say, oh, here's a great theory, let me go find the data and test it. You started with these aggregate trends and saying, how do I understand what I've seen? And not just the post-recession period, the pre-recession period. So you're saying, okay, that's where I started. I build a theory that I understand that's consistent with economics. It's not like some new theories.
No. This is
everything
labor demand, labor supply. Yep, exactly.
Is the core of economics. Labor demand and supply.
Stuff you've been doing for decades before I started.
I don't know. A lot of people have been doing it long before me. But anyway, we have that. And so now you're saying, okay, fine and dandy, but there might be a million other theories that fit the data. So now you're saying, how do I make sure this is, quote, the right story?
Exactly.
So what did you do?
So in the U.S., it's kind of nice because different locations in the U.S. have different amounts of manufacturing mix and had different amounts of housing boomness. So I don't know, that's a technical word. So when you're thinking about places like Detroit, which is heavily manufacturing based, and you look at the data in Detroit about not the aggregate employment rate, but the employment rate for Detroit, okay? And you look at the employment rate from Detroit from 2000 to 2004, when these manufacturing jobs were going away, and you see the employment rate in Detroit plummet during that time period. Okay, in other places like Detroit, you had very similar patterns. Dayton, Ohio, or Worcester, Massachusetts. There's lots of places around the country that have strong manufacturing bases that lost a lot of manufacturing jobs in the pre-period.
So you're saying they're like Detroit in the sense that they were very heavily manufacturing dependent.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you see those places and you see those manufacturing jobs go away 2000 to 2004, and you see employment rates plummet. Employment rate went up a lot, and then those people left the labor force, and eventually employment rates were really low. well before the recession started. So if you go in the data and you take a city like Detroit, you say, man, Detroit got hit with a really bad recession from 2000 to 2004, and the employment rate has never recovered.
And that is a period in which nationally employment rates are doing okay.
Exactly. And so how does that work out? Well, then you go to another place like Las Vegas, okay, or Phoenix. What do we know about those places? They had really large amounts of housing activity during this period. Some of it showed up in prices, but a lot of it showed up in construction. They were building like crazy. And the employment rate in Las Vegas and Phoenix during this time period was booming relative to historical trends. There was most of these men that we were talking about, 21 to 55 with less than a college degree. The employment rate for them wasn't like 85% in the national average. It was like 90%. There was tons of them working. No one was sitting on the sidelines. So when you average together the Las Vegases with the Detroits, you get that kind of aggregate trend. But when you disentangle the places that were hit with manufacturing, just manufacturing shocks, it looks like the recession started well before 2007 in those places. 2003, 4, 5 looked like really, really weak labor markets, even though it didn't show up in the aggregate level.
So your interpretation of the data is let's focus on 2000 to 2004, that the growth in construction is basically canceling out the decline in manufacturing, yes, leading to very little effect on the strength of the labor market for this group. You'd say, well, how do I test that? I'm going to find places where either the housing boom was much stronger or the manufacturing decline was much weaker.
Or both.
That's where they started. And seeing whether my story holds together, because my story would be, well, they cancel on average across the country. They don't cancel out location by location. And you see it in the data.
It screams it. The data scream it.
So if I just made a graph or something that would show one against the other, predicted versus actual, the standard test of a theory. What do I think? What does my theory say? What do the data say?
It's super strong.
Super strong.
Exactly. And it kind of feels right in your gut. If you're talking to people who were in Detroit in 2004, you say, hey, you feel this national boom? They're like, no. For them, wages were low, employment rates were low, well before the recession ever started. And you talk to the guy in the street in Las Vegas, say, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. I'm doing so good. I was thinking about going to school, and now I'm not even going to school, which is something we could talk about in a little while, about how this housing boom might have shaped people's human capital decisions. But the data kind of scream that this has been going on in the background, which, again, when we're thinking about policy going forward, about trying to say, why is the employment rate so low? Is it because, the economy, there's some friction where we're still in a recession that we got to clear out? Or if it's something more, structural, I believe the data say there's something more structural going on, and, the policies we might want to think about as a country are very different between those two stories.